After spending a lot of time exhibiting my products around the world at international trade shows, I learned to spot the telltale signs of buyers which would visit my booth but had absolutely no intention of buying from me at all. So they would spend a lot of time on the booth. They would come across as being incredibly interested and they may ask a lot of questions. But in fact, after a period of time, I realized that they had no intention of buying from me whatsoever. And I think it is incredibly important to try to spot these signals early so that you can divert your attention, in fact, to the buyers that really do matter. So let's go through some of these telltale signals. And the first one is a lack of eye contact, or maybe even no eye contact at all. So serious buyers tend to lean in and take a keen interest in what you have got to say. And in contrast to that, a buyer which is not particularly interested is going to be more sort of standoffish. They're going to possibly stand back. They maybe are not leaning into you, but they might be even leaning away from you. So they may be distracted even with what's going on in the aisle. They may have their mind on the next booth. So they are not engaged with you directly. And that is probably the first sign that not all is not well and the buyer has not really got any intention at this stage of buying from you. Secondly, a real buyer asks real buyer questions. Now, that sounds incredibly simple, and it is simple, but it's just so incredibly true. Now, at trade shows, and I'm a great one for this, at trade shows, the first step often is small talk. You need to form a relationship with the buyer. But ultimately, we need to move from that small talk to real buyer questions. And obviously, a buyer is there for commercial purposes. They're not really there to make friends with you. That is incredibly important, but that is not the ultimate objective. The ultimate objective is to buy and to buy at competitive prices, to buy products which are going to sell and put their companies ahead of everybody else. So we must keep in mind that very soon the conversation should move towards more commercial objectives. So there will be questions, quite rightly, about price, about minimum order quantities, about delivery times, about your packaging, about your production capacity, about the materials that you're using. What certifications do you have? And if those questions are not coming out at some point in the conversation, probably towards the end of the conversation, then that would signal that the buyer is not serious and have no real intention of buying from you. So, what is another signal that a buyer is not serious and has no intention of buying from you? For me, it was a lack of transparency and unwillingness to share information. You must always remember at a trade show, it is two-way. So, yes, buyers need to ask you questions, but still, you need to ask buyers questions as well. You want to understand about their market, their customers, their existing products, their pricing. It's not just a one-way street. It's a two-way conversation, an engagement with a prospective business partner. So if you are finding that a potential buyer is not willing to share information with you, they're not prepared to share information about their future direction, the products which they are currently selling, the markets which they're currently in. And these are all telltale signs that all is not well. They may answer in a very vague way, like maybe, it depends, we're unsure at the moment, we're just exploring our options. These are telltale signs that all is not well. Another telltale sign that a buyer is not all that he or she seems is a refusal to give you their contact details. Now, I came across this quite a lot, whereby a buyer would come onto the booth, they would literally mine you for information, but they were not prepared to share with you their business card or their digital information. And when I was relatively inexperienced selling, I would ignore this fact, still continue to give them the information in the hope that they would maybe reappear magically as a buyer at some point in the future. And not on one single occasion did that happen. And I learned very, very quickly that I needed to sort of move away from this type of customer, if you can even call them a customer at all. And what I used to do was I actually would give them my pen and a piece of paper or my notebook and ask them to write down their email address, their contact details, their company details, um, so that I could contact them after the show. Now, admittedly, they could still write down fake details, and I'm sure one or two of them did. But that would have the effect of making them feel maybe a little bit uncomfortable. And a genuine buyer is, in fact, going to write down their true details on a piece of paper for you. There's not going to be, I mean, that's the whole reason why they're there at the trade show in the first place, to exchange details, to make contact with potential suppliers. And if they were not prepared to write down their contact details on a piece of paper, I would quietly move to the next prospect. Another important point that does bear mentioning is that pretty soon you need to try to work out who exactly is the person that you are talking to and what is their role. So, are they actually responsible for buying or not? So, in my experience at trade shows, there are a lot of what I would call creatives who are walking the aisles, trying to get a feel of the latest trends in the industry, for example. There are a lot of consultants out there. There are a lot of other people that are at the trade show that are not necessarily going to buy from you or have any intention of buying from you at all. And you need to sort of find out if the person that is there right in front of you is going to buy from you or not. Now, I'm not about to suggest that just because somebody is not a buyer, you shouldn't talk to them. Quite the opposite, in fact. I have found actually at trade shows, especially when you're dealing with huge companies, they will have lots of different departments and they will go to the trade show in teams. And these teams will maybe wander around the trade show in different groups. So if, for example, you are speaking to a product development or a designer, they may not necessarily buy directly from you, but they can still inform the buyer to come to the booth to have a look at your product. And that is something which happened to me on quite a few occasions. The person standing in front of me took a keen interest in my product. They had no intention of buying, but they knew the right person that they could divert to me. And so long as you get on well with them, you strike up a great relationship with them, you accept the fact that they themselves are not going to buy from you, you can nevertheless encourage them to get the key decision maker, the right decision maker, to come to your booth later. I need to mention the importance of doing your research before the trade show. Now, obviously, the industries in which we all operate are huge, especially when you are doing international trade shows. You really get a feel of the immense size of the world and the number of companies that there are out there that can potentially buy from you. But I do think it's important to try to know as much about your potential customers as possible. And I'm not saying that you can know about the ins and outs of every single potential customer or buyer, but you can certainly try to make more of an effort to try to understand the key players in your industry. You can do things like looking at their websites, that you can listen to conversations which are occurring in your industry about particular companies, and you can get a feel pretty quickly with regards to the pricing, the quality, the materials that they are using, the way in which they package your products, the way in which they themselves sell your products. And you can then think to yourself, will my product actually fit alongside this particular buyer's product? And very often, your gut instinct will be correct. Obviously, if they're just selling wooden products, for example, and you're supplying stainless steel type items, they're highly unlikely to buy your product. But the idea and the concept of your product might well work well in wood. So that might be a customer that you might need to be a little bit cautious about. And this all comes from research. If you haven't done your research and that particular buyer comes onto your booth and starts asking you a lot of positive type questions, then you may be too quick to give them the information that they need, and they have no intention of buying from you purely and simply because your product and their product are light years apart. Let's talk about photographs as well. Buyers taking photographs of your products, especially if you have never even met them before. So again, if you are a new supplier, the temptation will just be to say, Absolutely fine. Take as many photographs as you like because you want to try to please the buyer and you want to try to win the buyer. And that is not the right way to proceed. You must remember that a photograph can just be given to another supplier, your competitor, and depending upon the complexity of the product, the idea could be copied pretty quickly. So it is not advisable to allow buyers that you don't know to photograph your product. And after a period of time, I realized this as well. And in fact, I used to have notices on my booth which just used to say no photo. And if someone got their telephone out or tried to snap some photographs, I would just say no photographs. And I was quite comfortable doing that because what I learned was an experienced buyer would never ever ask to do that. That was always my experience because they knew that the photographs would come later in the quotations. And then following on from that, the samples would come after the quotation. So there was absolutely no need to take photographs at all. I would only allow photographs from really trusted buyers, people that I had known maybe for several years, in fact. But this, the really good buyers would very rarely ask to take photographs. And while we're on the topic of samples, that was another red flag as well. So, for example, maybe a buyer that you had never met in your life before would ask you for a sample of the product. And similar to photographs, that was an incredibly dangerous thing to do because you've got to bear in mind in a trade show, you are with your competitors. They may be right next to you, in fact. So, if a buyer that you don't know asks for a sample, they can just as well take that sample within minutes to your competitor and ask them to copy it. So, similar to photographs, I would never ever give out samples at a trade show. That was something which a serious buyer would ask for after checking the pricing, after having received your quotation sometime later, but certainly not at the trade show. And the final telltale sign that buyers are not really serious at all is if they don't write any notes down. So if you can imagine the scene, a buyer is walking around in the trade show. They are seeing many existing suppliers, many potential suppliers. And if you are in the potential supplier bracket, which you inevitably are, how can they remember you later if they have got no notes or any way to recall who you are? So serious buyers will write down little notes about you and your products. Why? So that they can refer back to them later. They can maybe send you an email or try to progress things later, try to develop the relationship later with a view to possibly ordering from you. If they've not taken any notes down, then it's highly unlikely that they will take the next step. So I'd like to finish by saying that there are countless conversations that take place at trade shows. And it is so important to try to ascertain the genuine from the fake conversations because you will be able to save so much time and divert that time onto the conversations that really matter. If you work in international sales, export, or manufacturing, I share the lessons that I have learned from over 12 years of running my own trading business in Hong Kong, whereby I worked with Chinese manufacturers and set up my own brand of houseware items and sold those items from Hong Kong to buyers in North America, in Europe, and other major markets around the world. So please hit that subscribe button if you would like to learn a few more little insights like this. Thank you so much for listening.